Must say I'd like to be going back down there with them. One thing about a home group taking the service, you never know how long you have. I'm not a preacher, but a talker. And would you like 10 minutes or 30? There were a crowd of boys I was talking to this afternoon, and really, based on what we were chatting about, we could be here till midnight. Dire stuff, really. Real theology, you know. So I'm not going to talk about real theology tonight as such. Home groups. Now, originally we had these in the church quite a number of years ago. They were initially entitled house groups. And I think that was a complete misnomer. I'm a real enthusiast for the home group. And I adopt for the word home. There's a world of difference, or there can be, between home and house. House suggests something structural, impersonal maybe, temporary. Home means warmth, feeling, intimacy, belonging. We never say in our testimony, I was brought up in a Christian house. We're always brought up in a Christian home. And our boys, no matter how long they've been away from Coleraine, still talk about coming home. We've all been in, no doubt, well, I haven't been in a wonderfully expensive house, but we've been in very flashy houses. And sometimes houses like that can be cold and unwelcoming. Yet I'm sure, and I'm guilty of this probably with the rest of you, we spend so much time, especially nowadays, discussing houses, house prices, the crash, everything else. And all we're doing really is talking about the shell, with enthusiasm and maybe even with envy, whilst ignoring the absolute importance of the atmosphere and the ethos of the house. So I am a keen supporter of home groups, and all of us who go, I think, would be of exactly the same mind. Home in the Scriptures is invested with deep significance, even initially the nomadic tent. And I would like to make 3 points about the home that I hope will challenge and encourage us all. First of all, open homes. Open homes. I was reading in the New Tribes Mission magazine during the week about Papua New Guinea, and one of the missionary wives said this: there are always lonely or sick people that need extra care, a cup of tea, or just a chat. They know my house is open for them. Now, in our home group, with some of the questions and studies we've been doing, we struggle sometimes to find how to apply active biblical teaching in our community. Because people don't come to church much anymore. People don't respond really to messages shouted from a distance. People sometimes are turned off by what they see or think they see, and sometimes they're right, which they call hypocrisy. And certainly all of us are aware, even in as we've heard tonight, and all of us would go along with Clark and Alvin. Not Clark even, Scott and Alvin. I'm sure Clark as well. I'm sure there's a divergence that we're aware of between word and action. What means have we, as concerned believers, wishing to make an impact, with our lack of time, our frustrations in witness, our despair at the way the world's going? Well, there are some things that God has given all of us, obvious things. But sometimes we have concentrated so much on centralizing our witness that we do not even realize the common potential we all enjoy in promoting fellowship and outreach. What often passes as fellowship, that is, sitting passively as you're doing at the moment, I hope not too sleepily. Where is he? Oh, sorry. Sitting passively in a meeting for an hour on a Sunday, or maybe twice, and exchanging a few often predictable words on the way out. This hardly reflects the togetherness of the early church, which made such an impact on their environment. And that was a hostile one. What sometimes we regard as outreach, the occasional attempt to lure people into the church, for them an unfamiliar building, to hear a lecture, can rarely be read in the vibrant New Testament church. What did they do? Well, one repeated thing they practiced was the opening of their homes to each other and to outsiders. Now, don't get me wrong. I am an avid supporter of Coleraine Baptist Church and all that we do. But I feel that we need to be open and flexible, and even, and I think I can say this because it applies to me, even simple. Look at the examples in the scriptures of how homes were used. First of all, how the Lord used homes. He didn't have one, so he used other people's. He used one to eat with despised outcasts, on one occasion Levi, and another Zacchaeus. He received hospitality and love from Lazarus and his sisters. In fact, in Luke 10:38 it says, a woman named Martha opened her home to him. What a lovely thing to do for the Son of God. He used a home to raise a paralytic to full health, a 12-year-old brought back to life, to encourage his beloved apostle to take his grieving mother to his own home. And how did the early church use their homes? Well, in Acts 2, they went from house to house sharing meals. In Acts 9:43, Peter stayed with a man called Simon, whose trade involved practices which no self-respecting Jew would tolerate. And that's where God spoke to him. In Acts 12, the church meets in John Mark's house, praying for the release of Peter, who then unbelievably knocks the door. The church in Corinth met in each other's homes. Now, they may have gone over the top in what they did, but they celebrated love feasts prior to taking communion together. The first foothold, as we've heard from Ida, for the gospel in Europe was established with Lydia's conversion and her subsequent offer of hospitality to the missionary group. From that, great things happened in that city. Open homes. I'm sure we all agree with the principle and the New Testament practice, and it's something we all have. So perhaps now we've open heads. Now that's not my second point. My second point is open hearts. Very often our nodding approval to the teaching of God's word remains cold and dormant and inactive. As with the primary response to the gospel, fact must be transformed into faith. Acknowledgement must become obedience. Is an open home just a good idea? Something that worked quite well in an ancient Middle Eastern culture? Or is it more? Is it like a spiritual gift which may be valid for some, but not for others? Should elders practice this, but maybe the rest of us are excused? Well, they certainly should, because it's one of the criteria for the appointment of an elder in 1 Timothy 3:2 and Titus 1 verse 8, as are other things that we do accept, like self-control and management of family. An inhospitable elder is a contradiction in terms, and we don't have those. But before we become judgmental, all of us are included. In fact, it's not just a reasonably good idea for others, it's a requirement for us all to consider. And presumably because it's a command, it's not necessarily something we do just spontaneously or automatically. And these words were addressed to people who might have been more culturally inclined that way than we are. Romans 12:13 says, share with God's people in need. Practice hospitality. Now that's a command, and it stands alongside other commands which we would never quibble with. Love one another. Be faithful in prayer. Live in harmony with one another. No exceptions. 1 Peter 4 verse 9 says, offer hospitality to one another, and it adds, without grumbling. It's not meant to be a chore. It is to be a positive, joyful affair. And it's not one-sided. There are blessings for the giver. Did you hear what, I'm sure you wondered what I was going to talk about with the two readings. Did you hear about what the writer of the Hebrews said? Keep on loving each other as brothers. Do not forget to entertain. Now, he added the word strangers, for by so doing, some people have entertained angels without knowing it. Now, there were a few in our house this afternoon. I mean, not just people being entertained, angels. Treat all visitors as potential heavenly guests. And others appreciate it. Priscilla and Aquila seem to run an open house, and mention of their names in the eternal scriptures is usually connected with their generous hospitality. Paul mentions the otherwise unknown Gaius in Romans 16 verse 23 as he whose hospitality I and the whole church here enjoy. So we in our day need an open heart. Again, that was in Acts 16, as far as Lydia was concerned, to what the Lord is saying to us in this and many other matters of church development. It involves our will, our willingness to respond, even tentatively, to his commands and his patterns and his desires. So we need, finally, open hands, a positive, practical response which honours him, helps others, and blesses ourselves. But you may say, you don't know my circumstances. I'm not good at cooking. That's not a personal statement, by the way, although it's true. Who mentioned a slap-up 4-course meal? What about a cup of tea and a scone from kiddies of Coleraine, if they do them? To a lonely, hurting, bereaved person, or to a seeker after God, a one-to-one show of love and concern means more than a buffet dinner. My house isn't grand enough, but I'm absolutely sure, knowing practically everybody here, that it's homely and welcoming enough. Sometimes, as I said earlier, grand houses can be just that wee bit inhibiting. You, the person, and not the furniture, are the key to blessing. I've no time with all my responsibilities. Well, you've time to eat, presumably. Most of us had a Sunday dinner today. Sometimes we have a cup of coffee in the evenings. Hopefully it doesn't, or hospitality hopefully doesn't require extra work necessarily. It involves inclusion in the existing arrangements. By, for example, on a Sunday, throwing another couple of potatoes into the pot, which anyway is probably more rewarding for the visitor. Now, there are circumstances where it is impossible for people to do what they'd love to do in this regard. But excuses like those ones, yes, they're understandable, but they're not really sustainable. And just don't invite the people you meet all the time, your special friends. Invite needy people, those in the periphery of church life, students from abroad, believers and non-believers, people of different ages and backgrounds, families. It's a great way to get to know people. And again, a simple way to serve the Lord. Try it and enter into one of the blessings that all of us can enjoy. Nora and I are so grateful to all who have shown us love and hospitality over the years in this church, and not least in the wonderful hospitality we receive in our home groups, which I trust all of you support. So whether formally with groups or informally in our homes, let us use this God-ordained, Jesus-practiced, biblically encouraged way to honour the Lord, serve the church, and influence others. Now just listen to 2 or 3 verses here that I want to read out to finish with. In Matthew 25, verses 34 to 40. Very serious context here. And this is what the Lord says. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world." And then you expect to hear some wonderful deeds that these people have done. How does it go on? "For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." Then the righteous understandably will say, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in? When did we see you sick or in prison?" The king will reply, "I tell you the truth. Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did for me." And finally, in Luke 14, verses 12 to 14. Then Jesus said to his host, "When you give a luncheon or dinner, do not invite your friends, your brothers or relatives, or your rich neighbors. If you do, they might invite you back, you hope, and so you will be repaid. But when you give a banquet, who do you invite? The poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. These are just a few of my thoughts about the home, about our home groups, and about what is open to us, not the great public ministries that some people are gifted with, but just the simple, everyday opening up of ourselves and what we have to those in need. And I hope God will bless us all as we meet together this Wednesday night for another study in Job. By the way, the piece we sang earlier, or tried to sing, you may have noticed we will probably sing it. The pastor knows it and asked us if we would practice it so that we maybe have it in a Sunday morning service when we do Job. Let's stand and sing 411 in Mission Praise. Again, a very simple chorus, but so profound in what it says. Let there be love shared among us.